Hello. So this is just a brief video on the career of George Groves, known as St. George Groves. He is an English super middleweight fighter, and he has had a pretty impressive career. And he's just announced his retirement at the relatively young age of 30, which is actually quite young these days by boxing standards to retire. So we're assuming here this is a set retirement. I think it very possibly might come back, but assuming it doesn't, let me just have a very, very quick rundown of his career. So George Groves is from Hammersmith in West London. He's 30 years old and he compiled a record of 32 fights, 28 wins. Now, there are a lot of fighters who have longer records than that and never get distinguished. I think this is one of those guys that has definitely made his mark on the sport. Um, I probably wouldn't have him in the top pound for pound 10 British fighters of all time, but I think he definitely deserves a mention. I think he's a good, tough, solid fighter. I think he's brave. I mean, I think every fighter by nature is brave, but I think Groves has been in some real wars, and I think when he and Carl Froch stepped into that arena at Wembley in 2014 in front of 70,000 people, um, or was it 80,000? 80,000, in fact, a record that was subsequently broken by Joshua Klitschko, but nevertheless, 80,000 people. They made history in having the largest boxing crowd in the modern era, certainly in the post World War II era, in a British ring, and one of the largest ever. And that in itself, I think, is history making. That would have been impressive in itself, but it turned out to be a great fight. And he and Carl Froch are associated in the way that other fighters are forever linked to each other. We think Carl Froch, we immediately think of George Groves. We think George Groves, we immediately think of Carl Froch. So they'll forever be connected. Um, he's quite a colourful fighter, quite distinctive fighter. He's got some very interesting tattoos. I believe one of them is a gingerbread man, which is maybe it's some sort of in joke at his gym. I don't know, but aside from the two Froch fights, which were real wars, recently, I believe it was 2017, he had won a hell of a fight with Chris Eubank Jr. And that was a fight that went to Groves, but both men really put their heart and soul into that. That was a really brutal fight, and no one can accuse either fighter of not showing heart in that fight. Um, and I believe it took place in the Manchester Arena. Um, he's also had other notable fights. His fight with the German opponent Edward Gutetnik was unfortunately marred by controversy because Kudetnik, I understand, was left in a coma afterwards, and it showed the dark side of the sport. Groves was clearly affected by it, as any decent human being would be. I don't know what the latest is on Edward Kudetnik, but that was a sobering reminder of the dangers of this sport. His last fight was against Callum Smith of Liverpool at the King Abdullah Sports Centre in Jeddah, sports city, I should say, in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, which must be one of the most unusual venues for a boxing match. Very hot climate. There was a lot of practical things to overcome. There was even questions if their girlfriends could come to watch, being Saudi Arabia. Um, just a quick rundown on his record. He's defeated some notable names. Martin Murray, very courageous fighter, very tough fighter from Liverpool, who is famous for his bout with Gennady Golovkin. Um, the the Russian Fedor Chudinov, um, just looking through his record here. Badu Jack was a notable loss at Madison Square Garden 2015. Carl Froch he lost to twice, but in the first fight there was great controversy. Now I remember that, and unfortunately that was at the 4-4U Arena in Manchester 2013. It was a real toe-to-toe fight. I personally believe Hard Foster called it right. I think that Groves was showing heart and determination, but his legs were gone, and a referee has to make a split decision. And I always say it's better ending a fight early rather than too late. Now, Foster got quite a lot of backlash from that. He even had death threats online. I remember I made a video defending his judgment. But anyway, that was the first fight. And then the second fight, both guys came in like gladiators. I believe it was Froch actually said, half jokingly, we should put on sandals. And it felt like a gladiatorial contest. 80,000 people at Wembley, one hell of an atmosphere. I mean, I will never forget that fight. I've got the DVD of it. Incredible. That was a loss to Groves, but I don't think it's a case that. I mean, Froch won both fights. There's no doubt about it. And I think overall Froch is the better fighter. But I do believe they were close fights, and I believe that Groves really showed his mettle in those fights. Um, Other notable wins: the great Jamaican Glenn Johnson, James DeGale. This is going back now. Um, so George Groves turned professional on the 15th of November 2008, and like I say, he's just retired. So in boxing terms, it's kind of an average length career. He's only 30 years old. To be honest, I would be surprised if he really is retired. But I sort of hope so because he's okay, he's going out on a loss, but he's had an impressive career. He's going to be remembered as one of Britain's, I think, best super middleweights of all time. Not the best, that clearly goes to Joe Calzaghe, but I'd put him around third or no, maybe around fourth or fifth. I'd have Calzaghe at one, Froch at two, Chris Eubank Sr. at three, um, then probably Nigel Benn at four, then probably George Groves at five, as Britain's best super middleweight. Okay, so that's the career of St. George Groves. He can hold his head high. I like to say, I hope he is retired because a lot of fighters come back. Groves is still young. I believe he can continue to fight. I don't think there's any health issues, but it's a dangerous sport, and it would be a tragedy if he came back, something happened, and he could have retired. It's anyway. Let me know your thoughts.